Welcome to Basics Podcast. Today's topic is normal improvement. How to help players, youngsters, even into high school, how to improve normally. The first thing we're going to discuss is a quote from Coach Wooden's iconic book, They Call Me Coach. This is highly recommended reading. It's just one of the best sports books of all time. Of course, UCLA won 10 NCAA championships, 7 in a row. Wooden had no trouble at all recruiting. He didn't even have to recruit. Everybody at that time wanted to play at UCLA. So there's a buddy of his who says, let's go watch these two players in LA. They're terrific players. Wooden liked the guy. So he said, oh, yeah, I'll go watch him. But he didn't really even need to, but he just did. And this is the quote from the book, which will start off our conversation here with Coach Erny. We'd come to watch a couple of other boys whose names I've long since forgotten. Pointing toward the floor, I said, that little guy with Polly is the smartest player on the floor. He's only a junior? I haven't heard much about him, but I'm going to watch him another year. If he grows a little and he shows normal improvement, he might be the best prospect out there. Well, that player turned out to be Gail Goodrich, who's one of the top 50 players of all time in the NBA. Perennial all-star in the 70s and even into the early 80s. So here's a player who no one even knew of versus these other guys who were supposed to be the next great thing. And Goodrich just continued to improve normally. So as we get into this conversation, I want to define what normal improvement actually is. So I went to the dictionary and just pulled it up. Normal means conforming or adhering to a usual, typical pattern. Improvement is a change or addition that improves or leads to growth. So if you combine those two definitions, normal improvement is a typical pattern that leads to growth. So here we are. Is there a typical pattern that leads to growth in youth basketball and youth sports generally? The answer is absolutely not. There is no typical pattern. It's all over the lot. And so we're here to discuss this issue, and we're excited to have you with us today, Coach Erny.
Yeah, it's a great quote from the book. Read that book a couple of times, and just to get into that, the thing that stuck out to me about that quote, and we talked about this, is that the idea that Gail Goodrich was a junior in high school, and Coach Wooden said he's only a junior, so it's like this kid has time to improve, and he's a junior in high school. And I think we live in a day and age now where it's like if your kid is in fifth grade and he doesn't make the fifth grade travel team, it's like you press the panic mode button and you look to do something different. Because unfortunately, like you said, the atmosphere and the youth sports, everything's all across the board as far as the ideas of how what is competition, what is elite, and what how do you improve. And just going back to the times with Wooden, and this kid's only a junior, meaning he has time to grow, he has time to mature, he has time to grow physically and mentally and skill-wise. And of course, the rest is history. Like you said, he ends up being one of the best players ever. So that stuck out to me that we, as a coach, as trainers, we deal with this all the time with these kids who are almost, and the parents especially, but feel the stress of how do I get my kids to improve? We're behind, right? And sometimes we just have to take a step back and ask ourselves, okay, well, what can we do in a normal setting without pushing our kids too hard or without making mistakes? What is normal improvement for our kids for youth sports?
Well, interestingly, you used two words in that introduction there. One was travel ball and another word was elite.
Right.
There are what we call euphemisms for competition. They're euphemisms. They're tangential. They just barely touch upon the topic. So there's a couple of euphemisms that we're going to discuss. Travel ball, travel teams. Another euphemism is the word elite or comparable greatness terms that are applied to these teams. Another euphemism are national tournaments.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there were like 5 national tournaments in Michigan last year.
Yeah. How many nations are there? And then another euphemism are exposure events. This is mostly for high school kids where, organizations say, come and play in this exposure event and we'll have 100 colleges there and so on and so forth. They don't tell you that most of them are junior colleges, or they're just schools that the people know from this, the organizers know, and it's essentially a money-making endeavor. So let's discuss those a little bit in terms of how parents are pressured to play on these teams because they think it's the only way to go.
Well, and our topic is normal improvement, so we think that oftentimes competition means improvement, right? We've kind of touched on this in the past with sort of the idea of leagues and how sometimes those aren't the best way to improve, is to join a team and play in a league, and you touch the ball every 10 possessions, and you're doing all these things. That are you really getting better? And so all these terms are thrown out there that really are attractive to parents and to kids, and it's unfortunate because there are no shortcuts. There's no it's not like if your kid doesn't have the skills and they happen to be on a team, you can breathe a sigh of relief and say, all right, my kid's going to get better. He's on the team. And unfortunately, that's just not the case. We see it all the time. And I know we have some examples, like we have some kids who were the best players at the middle school level, and they were the best players in their summer teams, and then all of a sudden and it's not all of a sudden, but over the course of years, they become upperclassmen, and they're not the best players. And some of the kids don't even make the varsity team by the time it's all said and done. So what are the gaps in those players' development? Like what happened in their development as a player that wasn't normal improvement? Because obviously they struggled to continue to improve once they got to a certain point. So I think that's kind of like the question that we want to try to tackle today is what can kids do to improve normally if these euphemisms for competition, the elite, the travel, the national, the exposure, if those aren't necessarily the best ways to improve, what are some ways?
Well, we actually listed some from our position at Basics. How do kids improve normally? The first one is players must love the game, what we call intrinsic motivation. It must come from within. Here's a telltale sign. You probably have a hoop at your house, parents, right? Many of you do. Is your kid out there practicing on his own, right? Is he actually doing some work by himself or herself, working on his left hand, shooting jump shots, working on pivots, or just even playing, getting a buddy over to play? Or because this day and age is different than when we grew up, is there a local gym or park that they go to play at? Unmanaged, not choreographed, right? So right. Intrinsic motivation. A second element would be, and this is huge, these kids, it's one of the obstacles. We'll talk about obstacles later. These kids have so many obstacles thrown at them. It's a miracle any of them get through it. They must have the opportunity to improve with patience, with a capitalized P, patience. Don't force the competition too soon. This was addressed in the League Fatigue podcast. They need time to improve. They can't just be thrown in. Competition does not equal competitive growth. They're barely related.
Well, going about that, I mean, the patience thing, I mean, again, going back to the Wooden quote, the kid's a junior. If that was today and the kid's a junior and he's not the one being looked at, that kid's parents might, have, let's look to do something else. Let's try to get into a different sport. And so the lack of patience in today, and that's a cultural thing. That's not just it's youth sports is often a reflection of our culture. So this is is patience lacking in general? And I think the answer is yes. So when you have a young kid and you have to start with, do they really seem to love the game? Do they want to go to training, or do they want to go play, or they do things on their own without you forcing? And if the answer is kind of, or I think so, then you move to, okay, well, let's not throw so many things at them right away and sign them up for all of these, like you said, these competitions and things like that, without making sure they have the skills. So the third item, right, we have down here is, because basketball is such a highly skilled game, because it requires so many very just detailed and precise skills. Yeah, we use that word a lot, precise, because it's such a small space and because there's 10 kids on the court, because it's just one of those things where it's different from other sports. All the skills need to be learned before you can really benefit, normally or to a good extent from competition. So you have to, if you don't have skill, you can't see the court, or you can't do these things where you can't, know how to jump stop. You're going to travel every time. You can't dribble with your left hand. The competition element isn't going to help your kid improve normally.
How many times have we heard this? He's a big kid. They're telling him to run down the court, get in the post,
right,
turn his back, and try to catch the ball, right? This kid's 11 or 12 years old, maybe 13. That kid should be on the perimeter as well as in the post. That kid should be learning how to jump stop and dribble and extend,
right,
as well as post moves, the up and under, the jump hook. All the players need to learn all the skills.
Well, it's funny. LeBron James played point guard, I think, last night. He started as point guard. So this isn't just 11 and 12-year-olds. Basketball is changing to kind of positionless basketball. There's players who can do 4 different positions. The big guys can shoot now. The small guys have to be able to guard big guys, and they got to be able to play with their back to the basket sometimes. And really, the game's transitioning to positionless. I mean, so unfortunately, a lot of times the coaches and the youth leagues and things are behind the times, and it's like, okay, you're big, but you're 9 years old, but you're big, so you got to be by the basket every time. And we understand that when you get to maybe high school or college, there are roles you have to play on a team to be successful. And even in the NBA, right? There's guys still have to be able to. Not everyone can do the same role at the same time, otherwise it's not going to flow well. But the way the game's changing is the skill sets have to be more complete. The big kids have to be able to handle the ball. The big kids, if you're a big kid who can shoot from the outside, you're going to stand out in such a huge way. And so, yeah, as we see this all too often, kids are forced into positions, right? You're the 1, you're the 2, you're the 3. You go stand on the right wing every time, and you cut off this screen. And we're kind of learning how to run a play, but we're not learning how to play the game.
The numbers drive me crazy, just for what that's worth. I mean, I understand 1 is the point guard and 2 is the shooting guard and 5 is the center, right? But how many times did you see Tim Duncan bring the ball up? I saw Duncan bring the ball up probably every game. There'd be an opportunity, especially in the playoffs,
sure,
where because of the position on the court, all of a sudden the 6'11" guy has the ball and he's got to bring it up. It happens. So these players learn these skills at an early age, and it needs to be reinforced with constant repetition. And this is, again, how do kids improve normally? Well, another bullet point is the practice to game ratio. How many games are you playing versus how many times you're practicing? At basics, we shoot for 4 to 1, 5 to 1, 6 to 1, as many practices as games.
Right.
At the local level, with tournaments and leagues and the things that exist, if it's 1 to 1, they're kind of lucky.
Sure.
And sometimes the one practice might be abbreviated, or they split the gym with another team, or whatever that might be. There's only a couple of hoops, so they can't work on shooting. Again, if the goal is to make the team in middle school and high school and be impact players, then the practice to game ratio needs to be 4, 5, or 6 to 1. It's not an easy thing to do.
Right. And it's not, and it's not we use the word attractive, right? With those terms, those euphemisms. It's practice isn't, you're not going to draw people in and you say, all right, we're going to practice 5 times and we're going to play only once every couple of weekends or whatever. So that's always the dilemma, right? With coaches and the leagues is even if people understand this, it's hard to draw people in. So I would say if you're a parent or you're a kid, find those opportunities to get your kid practice time. If it's not going to happen with some team that you're on, then find some other avenue to get rid of that obstacle that your kid might be facing to improve normally, which is not practice enough, and go somewhere else or in addition to or whatever. But that's an important thing for sure. So we talked about when the kids should compete. Like, when do you actually start competition? Like, this is kind of in a sense, I think it can be different for different kids. I really do. We say when you have skills that are measurable, and we use two skills primarily to look at a kid. One of which is really easy to actually numerically measure, and the other you can measure by looking at like a checklist of skills. Yeah. But the first one is the crossover, and so as a player, I played a guard and I was 6'4", but I had to be able to dribble the ball and cross over. This was something that I had to learn at an early age, that crossing over you have to do, and Coach did too. You have to do this at an early age. You have to be able to, we say there's like three primary things. You have to be able to see the court, right? When you cross over and you exchange hands, can you do so, but also not lose sight of the court? And I was just working with a bunch of middle school boys the other day. We had, it was obvious, like right when the kids change direction, their eyes go down, some of them for like 2 or 3 seconds until they can gather the ball back. Think about all the things you're missing on the floor, or the things that you're not seeing when you're looking down. So having vision when you cross over, right? Can a kid do that? Can they change direction and still look up the court? Can they make that cut sharp like a Z? Can they plant their foot, change direction? You can hear that squeak of the shoes on the floor, right? Because they're really sticking their foot to the ground and changing direction sharply. Or does it look like they're kind of winding around and making an S? Are they not changing speeds, essentially, is what it is? Because when you change direction, you also should change speeds. That's what makes it sharp. And then can they protect the ball? Can they go from their right to their left? Okay, and then make sure that ball is not being exposed. Even though they're crossing in front of their body, you're actually getting it almost behind your body, or in your pockets, we say, because that's a kind of a risky dribble. And so we just see this all the time. Can you see the court? Can you make that cut sharp? And can you protect the ball? And the answer for most kids, especially, well, even high school and below, is no. It's really not. And so you have to practice this. And unfortunately, a lot of times practices are you run a drill or you do plays, but you're not actually breaking down the skills of, okay, now you have to cross over and go to your left. So that's sort of a gap in a lot of kids' normal improvement, is their development is they can't cross over. And then the other one is another big one we measure.
Well, it's the mic and drill, and of course we talk about this a lot. This is very simple. There's a number attached to it. We know what the numbers are from 5th to 6th grade, 6th to 7th, 7th to 8th, 8th to 9th, and high school. And we know it by gender. What's average, what's above average, what's excellent, and what are the records. Why the heck would you compete if you can't make a left-handed shot a foot from the rim regularly? Right. And it's remarkable to me that we'll get high school kids in the gym, and they're in the 20s. They're in the 20s. They can only make 20, 22, 25 1-foot shots in a minute. The record, by the way, is 53 for high school boys and 48 for high school girls. The players who have records from basics 10 years of existence are almost all collegiate players. There's a direct connection between the ability to execute the mic and drill and the player's competitiveness. Yep. So these are solutions that identify how do kids improve normally. And so
we get the kind of the it's pretty rare, but there's kids that we work with, and it just makes our day, I think, when the parent sends a video of the kid, he's motivated, he's doing the mic and drill at home, and hey, I just beat my record, I'm in the 30s now, and it's a 6th grade kid, and it's like those are the moments where you say, yes, this kid has got it. This kid's got the idea. The parents are supportive, but they're not pushing because the kid's doing it on his own. And it's really cool to see when kids can understand that these skills should come first.
So we're closing down here. We want to provide a couple of solutions, at least from our perspective, for what would you do as a parent. So number one, please show patience. Take your time. Let the kid improve. Give him or her a shot. Don't measure the kid's ability by what team he or she is on, what their records are. Be patient. Let the kid play. Hopefully they're doing some off-season work which is not managed, right? Unchoreographed. So that's number one. Number two, let's please try to remove any obstacles that exist. And we have identified 3 obstacles. Number one, practice to game ratio. Try to have it be not 1-to-1. Try to have more practices than games. Number two, identify if the program your son or daughter is in is focusing more on plays than on teaching kids how to play. This is very common. You'll see programs and teams around that we're learning this play, that play. Against pressure, we're going to do this. Against zones, we're going to do that. Can they dribble with their left hand? Can they extend? Can they create space with their feet? Can they see the court? This is more important than the plays. And then a last obstacle would be to identify if they're playing year-round competition, right? Get the kid the heck out of the gym. They can play every day if they want, but again, unmanaged, not choreographed. Go to the park, play in their yard, get some buddies over, go to the YMCA, the aquatic center, tee it up, and have fun with no oversight. All right, Coach, I want you to address that.
And that goes along into the very last solution that we talked about, is to focus not on necessarily your player being, the best basketball player, but being a well-rounded student and a well-rounded athlete, and thus by extension just a well-rounded person. We talk about this a lot at Basics, how this should be the goal, and we can help with that. But when kids don't improve normally and they plateau, we say, and they reach this point where they just don't seem to be getting any better, a lot of it's because they're going about it the wrong way. And if you can focus on maybe you want to do some other things, play some other sports, or do some different activities, or take a break for a while and then get back at it and go hard. And a lot of times that can help avoid those burnouts and those plateaus that players often reach. So just instead of stressing, saying, gotta be the best basketball player you can be the most well-rounded student and athlete you can be, and all across the board. And if that's the goal, I think the results can be better for kids usually.
And believe it or not, the best thing for your kids sometimes, if they want to improve in basketball, is to get the heck away from basketball. Get away, do something else. Go to the beach, ride your bike, do something else. You come back rejuvenated. There's a bunch of examples of pro athletes who get away from their sport completely and they play something else. Nicholas was a good tennis player. Woods liked to go deep sea fishing.
Jordan broke my heart and played baseball for a few years. Yeah.
Mark Rippon, the Redskins quarterback, was a terrific golfer.
Yeah.
So get away from the sport. Less is more sometimes, many times, and we hope that you've enjoyed this episode, Coach. It was fun again.
Yeah, thanks, Jim.
All right.